Danielle Steel family tells. Do whatever you like. I have some work to do. I can stay in my room. You don't have to hide. Kate smiled at her. I am not 15. I am not ashamed of you. Well, that's nice to know. I was pretty embarrassing there for a while. You have improved, Katie said magnanimously, with a broad grin. What's his name? Paul. He goes to my school. He is really talented. He wants to be a graphic artist one day, but he is really good at fine arts. His parents want him to learn something practical like design. How old is he? 23. It seemed like a reasonable age to Annie, and she nodded. I will be happy to meet him. I liked it. I like it when you bring your friends home. Katie nodded and went back to her room and called Paul. He said he had come over around 5 and he said he would come over around 5 and after she talked to Paul, Ted emerged from his room. He looked exhausted. His sexual adventures with Petty were wearing him out. Petty had just called and invited him out to lunch with her kids. There was still snow on the ground in the park, and she had suggested a snowball fight or maybe skating for the afternoon. He liked the idea and had agreed. He left the house an hour later without telling his aunt or his sister where he was going. He just said he was meeting friends and didn't say when he had be back. Annie wasn't surprised and it didn't bother her. She didn't keep track she didn't keep track of his every move and at 24 he had to feel free to come and go when he stayed with her. Katie went out for a while too. She wanted to check out the sales at her favorite stores and she came back to the apartment shortly before 5. Annie was still working at her desk and had been there all afternoon. The doorbell rang a few minutes after Katie got home and she went to let him in. Annie could hear them talking and laughing in the living room and Katie had put some music on. It was The Clash, which Annie actually liked. They had been there for an hour when Annie walked through the room. She was on her way to make a cup of tea and intended to casually say hello. And she smiled at the handsome young man who stood up and held out his hand to shake hers. He was much more polite and poised than Katie's usual friends. He introduced himself with impeccable manners and he was wearing a blazer and a tie, which was unheard of among Katie's cohorts. He was a beautiful young man with jet black hair and deep honey-colored skin and eyes the color of onyx. And he realized that he was probably from the Middle East or maybe Indian, and suddenly she remembered the book about Muslim culture that she had seen in Katie's room. She had obviously borrowed it from him, and she hadn't said a word to Annie about him before he came. He was extremely polite as he shook hands with Annie. He seemed very mature for his age, and he was a far cry from Katie's tattooed and Pierre's friends from art school, who wore drooping jeans and torn t-shirts with uncombed hair. In an effort to make him feel welcome, Annie offered him a glass of wine, and he smiled and said he would prefer a cup of tea. It was a welcome change from the vast quantities of beer Katie's friends always consumed when they came to visit. The two young people followed Annie into the kitchen while she made the tea. Katie helped herself to a Coke, and Paul chatted easily with Annie, and she served him tea. Paul explained that his parents were Iranian from Tehran, but they had all been in the States since he was 14. He said he still had family there but hadn't been back to his native country for a visit in 9 years since they left, and added that he was an American citizen, as were his parents. He spoke without any trace of an accent and seemed very polished and adult and also very respectful in the way he spoke to Annie. Katie's eyes shone brightly every time she looked at him, and Annie's heart fluttered a little as she watched them.